Okay, well, I think the sort of the growing number of participants has sort of slowed down a little bit. So I suggest we just kick off, and maybe some more people will join. I think we're expecting between about 40 and 50 attendees today. And I just want to say, to start off with, thank you for taking the time out to join this. It's a creative masterclass. It's the Harrogate sort of brand design masterclass, and I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. This is actually my second time seeing this. We ran a similar session a few months ago with the guys from Thinking Place. We've got John Till and Peter Anderson. I'm going to give some sort of introductions to both of those in a moment. But for those of you who don't know me, perfect slide transition. I'm Mark Roberts. I'm the founder of a business called Beerhawk, which started as a sort of a craft beer discovery business in Harrogate, the centre of Harrogate, about 8 years ago, and has grown now. So we're about 100 people based, from Harrogate, which is where I am this morning, Wetherby and Leeds offices, and we've now got a couple of bars in London and Leeds as well. And alongside that, I'm also the chair of the Harrogate Place Leadership Group, which is the group behind the Think Harrogate Story, and the sort of the hashtag Think Harrogate that we actually launched at a launch event in Roosters back in March. It was just a couple of weeks before that the world seemed to sort of turn on its head, and we had lockdown. So if anyone was there and they joined us at that night, it's great to see you again, even if now everything has moved very virtually. But back at that story event, sort of back in March, we talked about the importance of having a really clear, consistent and compelling narrative about the amazing Harrogate districts that we're all part of. And, whilst this year has been fundamentally different to what any of us could have envisioned sort of back at the time, I think the benefit that we can all get from telling this consistent, compelling story about the place that we're in remains as relevant as ever. And I think it can really help boost businesses, it can boost the town, it can boost the local economy, it can attract inward investment. And that's one of the things why all of us involved are all volunteers, really just wanting to do what we can to help the district. And when we say the district, we're talking the wider district, not just Harrogate Town Centre, but all of the amazing places in the broader district as well. And I think, when we sort of talked about what the Harrogate story is, we also wanted to provide some ideas and some tools and some inspiration to help all of us with our storytelling. And this could be about the Harrogate district, it could be about our businesses, it could be about our community groups, other organisations, our place in general. And so to do this, we've got some wonderful guests and guest speakers that I'd like to quickly introduce. So firstly, we have John Till, who you can see on the screen there, is the founding director of Thinking Place. Thinking Place is a place-based group who have sort of helped Harrogate Borough Council and our Place Leadership Group develop the Harrogate Story. He's going to give us a very quick recap on our story, talk about the 4 themes that underpin this, and also share the big idea so that everyone has got the sort of the same information. And then we're going to move to Peter Anderson, who is an award-winning creative director. So I think, if I just mention a few of the TV and films that he has been involved with, I think, they will probably speak to how exciting this is going to be. So Cobra, Dracula, Good Omens, The Hustle, Casualty, Unforgotten, and many more. So really exciting to sort of see how that creativity and design can come through in what we're talking about today. And I think as they both run through these short presentations, please do think about how you could potentially bring these themes to life in the context of your business or organization. And we're going to have about an hour to an hour and a half. I think we're booked to 12 o'clock. We might be a bit shorter than that, as it is on Zoom. And we're going to pass to John, we're going to have Peter, and then there's going to be a Q&A. And I think If you can sort of think about any questions or discussions that you'd like to bring up as we go, that would be helpful. You might see a Q&A button at the bottom. In fact, it looks like we might have a question in it already, which I'll look at later. And we'll monitor that as we go and hopefully have a really good discussion. So that's all from me. I'd just like to hand now to John to walk you through the first bit. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And it's great to be with you all in Harrogate. Wish we were there in real life, but it's nice to be there virtually. As Mark said, I'm the founding director of Think Place. We work with different places across the UK to help them reimagine themselves and to tell their story. And I think, you know, there's very hard edge reasons why Harrogate wanted to do this in terms of how the place is perceived. Obviously, it is well known, but perhaps it wasn't as well known for some of the things that are going to be important for its economy. So that's where we came in terms of helping listen to the stakeholders and develop the narrative from that, which is really what I'm going to walk you through here. And the reason the story is so important, and Peter will relate to this, is the story drives everything, whether that is the visual identity and language, or whether it's photography, or whether it's going to be what you do with public realm. The story is the strategic driver for all of that different activity. Okay, so the most important element, I think, thinking about this story is that, as Mark said, this is not just about Harrogate. It's about a piece of fuzzy geography which encompasses the whole of the district and beyond that. It's not trying to just market a local authority area. So it is relevant for all the towns. And I think when you see the themes, you will see how they cut across and relate to each place. So the story is very much a unifier of the place, whilst recognising that Harrogate is clearly the place with greatest resonance. It is very well known. It is the brand hero. And underpinning this is thinking about how we use this story to develop a diverse and a knowledge-led economy. And we know how important that is in the world that we're in now. And this is about an economy that is there for everybody. It's about an economy that helps everyone in terms of their prosperity and themselves. And it is also about the role of the visitor economy beyond just tourism. And by that, I mean the importance it plays in terms of attracting inward investment, the importance it plays in terms of attracting people to live there. So visitor economy is way wider in terms of the economy than just tourism. So I'm going to show you some evidence that supports each of the themes, and then I'll show you the theme. It's not all the evidence, but it's certainly pulling together some of the key aspects. And Harrogate and the area is a place where people come together to enjoy. That's the individual towns, that's the attractions, and that coming together is local people, but it's also people from the outside. And of course, you know, when we're into a more normal situation, that will be the conference centre, it'll be events. And the place itself, in a way, with its amazing urban and rural backdrop, the tremendous architecture in the places, the place in itself is an experience. So whether it is Brimham Rocks or whether it's Grantley Hall, as I say, people are, if you like, coming for an experience, for fun, for inspiration. And a lot of the time, the places that they're in, even if they're just walking around Harrogate Centre, it's inspiring. You know, it makes you feel better about yourself. It brings out the best of you. That might be as well setting a business up in terms of an upper floor of a building. So, you know, being a startup, being an entrepreneur. So all of the elements of the place kind of combine to give something very, very special. And we've articulated that theme as our place is your stage. So you come to us and we will bring out the best of you. The environment we have, the welcome that we have, the support that we give will make you perform better. And that might be growing your life or growing your business. The second theme is very much about business, and it's about thinking about how we grow that and how we hang on to that. And again, using the environment that we have to help promote business. And clearly, Harrogate has a lot of independent businesses, but it is also a place with an independent state of mind. And that has always been there. And it's quite a wonderful thing that you would never want to lose, that whether you're a digital business or whether you're a normal retail business, that kind of independence, that support, that view that you can achieve and do things differently in the place is very, very strong. And hopefully, as people think about how they're going to work, live going forward, that will bring opportunities to perhaps pull people out of the cities such as Leeds and York and offer opportunities for the knowledge economy, because people want to be in different spaces with history, heritage, texture, a rural surrounding. That's really, really strong. So it is about celebrating independence and independence. And it's also about thinking that we know that we're probably not going to attract the major investments. We don't have the land. So for Harrogate, small is special, and there's nothing wrong with being small. And you can be world leading as a small business, and you can do it in our place across our district. And in a way, that is kind of a continuum of what made the place special and what is going to make it special going forward. So a really powerful element to the story. And we've articulated that as a beacon of independent commercial spirit. And it is more than just having independent shops. It is that spirit, that sense of being, that sense of place that you get in all of the towns when you walk around them that you don't perhaps feel in other places. So moving on to the third theme, and this is really important now, this one. And this is about health and well-being. Harrogate is a place with green surroundings, countryside, big open spaces, clean air. And how important is that? How much have we valued that in the last 6 months? And unfortunately, are probably going to have to value it for a while going forward. What a place to grow and build a family. What a place to actually be stimulating for your mental health, to give you a balance in your life. And it is about sustainability. It is about the green economy and what we can do with that. And the great thing is we already have some fantastic businesses in the area that are very much on this agenda. Covens, Smithers, to name just two. So how do we make sure we make the most out of that? We really have to promote this strongly. It matters hugely to people now. And of course, there's going to be a different ecosystem. We've already been in it and are in it now, where our work is a bit about home. Maybe it will be a little bit about going to a city, but equally it could be at a cafe, having a meeting with people there just down the road in your town. So we have a completely different ecosystem in terms of how we build that work-life balance. And we've talked about this as being a lifestyle oasis. So a wonderful place to be, and kind of just that element of calmness, that element of space, that element of feeling I can get away from it all and feel safe doing it, equally important. So we move on to the last theme. And the last theme, unashamedly, talks about the wonderful food, drink, and whole plethora of products that there are in the area, and not just products that are local, equally important as they are, but global products such as Harrogate Water, well-known places such as Betty's, you know, and the products here that are of the place, that are from the sense of place, they are from the land. So they cannot be any more authentic than they actually are. And this allows us to use them in terms of how we communicate the place, how we develop festivals and events, how we promote our brand, and how we relate it to the Yorkshire brand, which obviously is generally hugely positive. So this brings in small businesses, large businesses, and as I said, there's a real provenance in place that people want to see, and it kind of fits really well with that health and well-being agenda. So we've talked about this one as artisans and brands, because you have these in spades across the district, and they're bringing forward wonderful product that really in itself speaks of the place. And sitting above these themes, we have a big idea. And as I said at the beginning, the important bit is Harrogate is known. It has brand recognition. And when we do the research, it's no surprise that people speak really positively of it, really. Many people have been there, they've had the experience, they've gone away feeling refreshed, reinvigorated. Of course, there are some challenges with it. Yes, it needs a little bit of polishing perhaps in places. We need to add a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of pizzazz, but we're in a great position of having a brand that is a complete jewel. And it means that the place has power, it has authenticity, but we mustn't compromise. When we use Harrogate, it's got to be quality in everything it says and everything it does, because it is using products that are already in that space, such as Harrogate Water. And how good is it that it complements the likes of Leeds, York, and the Yorkshire brand? You know, this is a place, yes, it has elements of affluence. It has elements of being a bit posh. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's posh in a nice way. It's posh in a way that I want a bit of that experience. I want a little bit of the Harrogate brand. And we've talked about this one as mobilizing brand Harrogate. So really getting it out there, making it work as hard as it possibly can for the benefit of the businesses and the benefit of the people that are in it. So this isn't just for incomers, it's very much for residents across the whole of the place. So you end up with a story with a big idea of mobilizing brand Harrogate and those 4 themes, which are really distinct to you. And that's the important bit here. This is about distinctiveness. It's there to help you compete. It's there to get your key messages across that at the moment, some of which are not getting heard. From our perspective, it has real cut through. And I think you're seeing some of the benefits of that already. And it is going to help as you move forward in terms of recovery and reset from coronavirus over the coming period.
Thank you very much, John. Really interesting, and thank you for sort of recapping the story. Just wondered now if we could pass to Peter to sort of run through some of the visual storytelling and the cues for that creating.
Absolutely. I'm just swapping over control. Okay, so I'm now sharing. Yes, I'm in. Hi, I'm Peter Anderson. I'm Creative Director of Thinking Place and Director of Peter Anderson Studio. We work with Thinking Place with a multitude of places, from villages, towns, cities, counties to countries. With my other hat on as Director of Peter Anderson Studio, I work branding film and television, and helping bring those stories to life, amongst other things with motion graphics. So just a couple of examples. So with the country, Northern Ireland, from being part of the team that created the strategic story. I was then in charge of all outputs from a creative direction point of view. So it's very important for me to understand what you can do with a strategic story in its multitude, in this case, of communications, from television, radio, to billboard, events, and many other elements. Another example, this is very recently, this is with Zambia. And this was about repositioning Livingstone to be a dominant force in central Southern Africa. And amongst other things, some of the plans were to literally paint the town with stories, which is incredibly exciting. And again, that came out of the destination management plan and working with the local talent. An example of one of our cities, this is Lancaster. And one example you can see here is, one of their many events, a town at Malden, everything here on a much smaller scale, but nevertheless simply as important. So amongst other things, you can see some of the environmental signage in terms of change of how the place kind of shows itself. And very importantly as well, that the place stands out to be unique rather than do what other places do, which is have things that come off the shelf and look the same. To event brands, this is working with the National Trust. This is an event brand which is really about capturing local oral history as part of the place proposition. So when it comes to film and television, this example, Mandela. But again, what's important when I talk about film and television in the context of this brand masterclass is really it's simply to understand storytelling and how storytelling is about understanding who your audience is, who's watching it, what is that story, therefore, from a creative perspective, what should that story look like? What happens in terms of creative expression? So an art house film, as you can see there, like Human Flow, looks very different from a mainstream MGM film like The Hustle. Different audience, different proposition, different story. Equally, when you think of television and the multiple brands in television, each brand is created from an audience in mind, from a specific story. So if you look at something like Little Dorrit, or Bleak House, which are effectively targeting a specific audience, that look and feel or visual language is much different from a modern proposition or a modern story, something like Sherlock. So our role in this will not only be bringing the brand to life, but it'll be lots of the other layers. So in the case of Sherlock, we were behind creating that visual language of text on screen, which you wouldn't think it is as far as 10 years ago. And it's been copied so much that it's just become part of normal communication on television. But at that time, this was a completely unique way of creating a visual language to help that modern reinterpretation of Sherlock. So when it comes to Harrogate, I create a series of words that come from the strategic story. Everything is about the strategic story. The story, as John mentioned, isn't about marketing slogans. It isn't something that's on the surface. It's an engine, and every place needs that engine, which makes it stand out and be unique. That helps it compete, that helps it get new jobs, that helps it retain young people because they have a little bit of pride in their place. And that also flexes muscle, not only with government in terms of bringing in money and investment, but also in terms of bringing the place together, where you as the place and the different businesses within that place coming together is as much a powerful thing as anything anyone can do externally. So these words, as I say, are visualizing words that will influence everything that you do visually in terms of bringing that story to life. It's all about mobilizing brand Harrogate. It's about recognizing the themes. It's recognizing our place is your stage and the names that come with that. Recognizing a beacon of independent commercial spirit. And again, finding words that help bring that to life. It's also about celebrating you in terms of as a lifestyle oasis, and recognizing and celebrating your artisans and brands. So that landscape of what makes your place special, the boutiques, the quirkiness, are all fundamentally important in terms of your expression. Showing those independent brands, showing that feeling of a place that's unique in terms of recognizing its history, but also modernizing it, also looking forward as opposed to looking back, which is absolutely essential. And actually not being afraid or not being awkward about the fact that you guys are elegant, you have a high quality offer. You know, that element of it being a little bit posh, that's a good thing. You know, it's a classy thing. It's not an ugly thing. It's something to be proud of. So the multitude of experiences that you offer, whether they be digital in terms of some of your business, or whether they be active in terms of what you offer in terms of lifestyle, are very important. So it's taking all these different elements and bringing that mix together, you know, that mix of both what you see on the street and what's happening in terms of the independent businesses and spirit that you don't see so obviously. So in terms of telling the Harrogate story, there's a multitude of ways of saying that. You can tell the story with words, you can tell the story with imagery, you can tell the story with a visual language, you can tell the story with an identity, you can tell the story with your behavior, with how you change, how you act. You can change your environment from the story. So photography is probably the most obvious way of recognizing that. And it helps to look at other places when you think about that. What does this mean, a strategic story? What do these words mean? How will that change how we do things? That's what this class is about, really. And take Holy Island, for example, in Holyhead. You know, some of the things that were important to it were this idea, its land, its connection with the Druids, its Celtic roots. There's a sort of spiritualism there that comes with that, a magical quality. So when it came to the photography, you know, a very simple thing that happened, you know, that not only were you animating its history and making it relevant for a current audience, but you were very simply, in this case, taking the photography into the sun so it has a spiritual feeling when you're looking at that. So its behavior in terms of this very simple form of communication was very much driven by the engine of the strategy. One of the other things that came across that was very important to it was the powerfulness of its land, you know, and it very much came up that its land was much bigger than its people in terms of its point of difference. So again, with the photography, the land is bigger than the people. It's as simple as that. Take somewhere like Coventry, you know, Coventry, you know, in fairness, isn't known for its city centre. It's not one of the prettiest city centres out there, but that doesn't matter. Actually, what's important to it is its innovation, its technology, its learning and enterprise. So what that means is when you photograph Coventry, you're going into some of these places. So this isn't the research and development at Jaguar Land Rover. So that becomes its city centre in terms of its point of difference. Also, you're going into the universities. You're saying, we're going to show off about our technology. We're going to show off about what makes us different in terms of our development and forward thinking. Aldershot, a much simpler proposition. Aldershot was very much about repositioning this place from somewhere that was army and known for being somewhere. You only went there if you were army. So putting the family first in terms of changing its story. The army were leaving. There's a new opportunity for family and a redefinition of the place. That meant quite simply, when you were photographing the place, you put the family first in the photographs. This is an old army facility, which is now reoccupied by families. So it's using the story, but also thinking about who's in that story and why they're in that story. So we go back to Harrogate, and we will go back again and again and again to these, I guess, engine elements, and thinking, how can we bring these engines to life? How can we as individual businesses or organizations use this to our advantage and work with each other to do so? So again, everything is driven, you know, I'm going to say it again and again and again and again. How are we bringing to life this idea of mobilizing brand Harrogate? How are we bringing to life your point of difference in terms of our place is your stage, in terms of inviting events and other things to happen within the place? You know, how are we promoting nationally and internationally us as a place, as a beacon of commercial independent spirit? You know, and again, how are we celebrating, showing off about, as a place, Harrogate being a lifestyle oasis? And within that, our multitude of artisans and brands. So photography, you know, it's very simply, part of what you're doing there is you're showing off about some of these brands. I mean, this one you all know, Harrogate Water. You know, we have Taylor's, again, another worldwide brand and certainly national leading brand. But we go in there and we bring those stories and those brands to life. So photography has a very functional role in terms of, as a result of the strategy, we don't just walk into the town centre and randomly take images. We bring the story to life based on your point of difference. And that also includes some of the independent businesses. And celebrating those businesses as equally as we would a town centre, you know, and whether that's something like distilling gin and the experience that comes with that, which is absolutely fantastic, and you know, the cream of artisan enterprise, I would say, to some of the other independent businesses, and shouting about them and celebrating them. And letting the young people know, you don't need to leave this place, stay here and get involved with your own independent spirit, or join some of the many businesses that are thriving in this area, you know, and enjoy that lifestyle oasis, enjoy what it has to offer, that independent spirit, whether it be a restaurant, whether it be a bar, that oodles in the place. Absolutely incredible, to the cafe culture, you know, which again has become probably more relevant now in terms of this notion that we're all working more locally, and those local offers are becoming more important to the food that's being offered. As I say, it's incredible what you guys have, and showing that is something to be proud of. So one of the other tools that you have is a visual language. So what is a visual language? Really, it's another way of telling your story. Photography will probably always be your lead way of telling the story, but it's something else. It's really a glue that holds the narrative together and works with the photography. It can be used as an illustrative form to say, because our unique story is this, we have this supporting illustrative element that works with that. It's something else that you work with, in terms of, that doesn't come out of the air, that isn't about my taste, it's about your story, and working with that. It's something really that stakeholders can use. If you had a logo, what you would have is you'd have an argument, you'd have an argument with your brand. You'd be saying, our logo, our brand, place logo, place brand, which is it? Actually, every business that's in the place owns the place and should be proud of that, and should use the brand of Harrogate as another form to say, as another mark of quality. So the most important thing here is a visual language doesn't compete with you as a brand, it adds to and complements it. So the context of the visual language is very important. In your case, it's about another way of showing your confidence. It's about connecting and joining up your assets. It's about recognizing the fact that you're a multi-layered proposition, and in different times you need to flex different muscles depending on where you need to communicate your story. it's about distinctiveness. It's another element of distinctiveness. There's nothing I can't stand more than going into a town and seeing the same thing as everywhere else, the same boots, the same H&M, the same places. And also, there's nothing worse than seeing the same signage, the same benches, the same stuff. So distinctiveness is very, very, very important. But also celebrating the quirkiness of your place, celebrating that it's not, there's a lot of things. There's railings, there is your unique benches, there's your unique buildings, there's your unique independent offer, and actually getting across those elements. So why would we use a visual language rather than a logo? Well, I guess to explain a visual language a little bit more, this is a very simple idea, or a very simple way of doing it, I hope. So if you take Chesterfield, much like the Eiffel Tower is hard to take away from Paris, although incidentally, when the Eiffel Tower first went up, most Parisians thought that it would be the end of Paris. It would destroy it. But of course, you know, history speaks for itself. In Chesterfield, you can't really get away from the twisted spire. It's a smaller story, it's a smaller place, but you can't get away from this element. So in terms of its strategic story, its big idea was about saying it needed a modern awakening. It needed to take all its elements which were absolutely fine, but give them a modern shake. Amongst that was also nurturing its inventiveness. And so if you were creating a visual identity for Chesterfield, modernizing it, knowing that in terms of its point of uniqueness and in point of its local importance, you couldn't get away from the twisted spire, you would do something like this, which we did, which was create a modern interpretation of its biggest icon. And if you look up Chesterfield businesses, most businesses have done their iteration of the twisted spire. But if you then take that strategic story, which is about, sorry, that was my iPhone having a mind of its own. If you take the modern awakening story as an identity, as I say, you create a modern twisted spire. If you bring it into a visual language, there's much more you can do with that. You can use its heritage of quirkiness and inventiveness, and you can use those elements of the twisted spire, the slats, the elements, as a metaphorical language to move forward and quite literally become a modern awakening, and do that with your illustrative elements to remind yourself of the fact that you can reuse your ingredients and push things forward and reinvent and rethink. The other advantage of a visual language is you can use it in and around your place. Anything from bus shelters right across the board to signage and other elements. So this is an example of two of the banners created by the place, generic banners on the left. So everything coming from that story. But then on the right-hand side, you can see a local developer who was very proud to be developing within the place. This is Waterside and Chesterfield. But they could effectively keep their own colours, keep their own branding, their own typeface, their own elements, but very quietly have the visual language of the place, which you can see as simply a whiteout watermark there. So that's doing something that isn't competing with their brand. It's not another logo on the left-hand side that's fighting. It's saying we actually have ownership to the place. So when it comes to Harrogate, there's a multitude of ways that the visual language can be used and be utilized. The important thing is it's getting in all those ingredients that makes the place special. And this can be used with flexibility, whether, as I say, it's with brochures and elements and part of things, and how that's showing the different elements, the quirky buildings, the proposition, the people cycling to work, the coffee culture, some of the unique forms in terms of your architecture, taking all those ingredients, sometimes using them in a very soft way, sometimes using them in a very dominant way, but effectively having a set of ingredients of things to be proud of, and flexibly using those ingredients. So the visual language here is showing not just elements, whether it be science, whether it be thinking, but it's also integrating them with the actual place itself, and some of those things in the place itself that make it feel unique. As I say, from buildings to columns to river, and effectively, showing off, really. Say, look at the ingredients, look at the products that we've got, look at the proposition of the multitude of layers of things that we've got to offer. And then where you have this visual language, you can use it in a multitude of places, in a multitude of ways. And very often the photography will dominate, the text message will dominate, but you have a supporting element with your visual language, which you can see with these various applied examples. And you can use it in a multitude of different ways. So again, the point being is that all those little points of difference are layered and brought together. Your fork to farm stories, your landscape, and all these factors are reasons why people have wanted to stay in the place, have wanted to walk down the street and have wanted to cherish the place and not leave. Your active life, your countryside story also fits into that. And when it comes to partner brands, I mean, this is just, you can use it in a way which is almost like an invisible watermark here just over the photography. And this is another example of that, where you can see just as an illustrative language, it's not affecting the typeface, it's not affecting the brand of the company, it's just adding another layer to celebrating the place. And again, you can see it here in terms of just putting it in the corner of a photograph modernizes that photograph, puts other layers of communication onto that photograph. You also have an identity, a logo, and there's a time and a place for using that. But the important thing is each of the places in the wider Harrogate, each of the towns can use and have their own identity and their own logo mark within this system, because each has an independent story to tell, and each have the ability to do that. So again, each of your places and individual towns can have their expression, but also use the sum of all things. The power of all your assets brought together is certainly not a disadvantage for any of the towns or villages. You also have a typeface in terms of that can be used. So in terms of applying the thinking, kind of what does this mean? What do we do with all this stuff? Well, that's about thinking about where will your story be visible? Where are your opportunities to tell it? And what for? What's it all for? So it always goes back to that notion of once you have your place story, your strategic point of difference, how can you use this? This is your story. This is the story that's come out of the stakeholders of the place. This isn't an objectified story. So your story, how can your story influence your future environment? How can you make a future environment which has come out of what makes you unique and competitive to other places, counties, cities, countries? How do you compete against them? How does it change your communications? How can you as an independent business use this story to change your communications? What products can come out of this? What new products can come out of the ingredients that make you special? And also, how do you change your behavior? Again, how does the strategy, and the strategy is simply really taking this massive amount of research and distilling it with a filter down to a concentrated element. And how can this change your behavior? How will this work? Again, we go back again to reminding you of these are your points of difference and how do you bring them to life through products, through your environment, through your behavior, and last of all, through your communications. It's only one of the elements in this. So as I say, it's not about finding a catchphrase. It would be about making multiple catchphrases that change over the years, but always going back to that notion of what makes you different. So who can tell your story? How does this work? So in the simplest way, you can tell it to your own community, and that can affect your young people's association with your place. So this was Hull. This was a simple exercise within the schools. This was saying to the young people, as an exercise, how many of you do you think when you grow up are going to go to college, go to university, leave Hull and not come back? Most of the room put their hands up. By simply showing them photographs and telling them what was unique about their city and asking the question at the end of the workshop, 70% of the children in that room put their hands up to say, actually, they were going to stay in the place and not leave now that they knew what was special about their place. I think it's incredibly powerful how simply communicating what makes you special could change the proposition and the relationship with the young talent of your place. There's other ways of doing it. There's fun, imaginative ways of doing it. This was with Channel 4, and we did an exercise where we simply asked the people in Castleford, you know, what was special about their place, and also what wasn't special. What were the elements that were wrong about that place? And rather than that go into some website and disappear in some survey, we papered the town with their stories. And we went in with a Channel 4 television crew, and we filmed the people's response to their own stories, both good and bad, and gave them a sense of power and a sense of control within the community, that their voice mattered and that their voice was listened to and could change their future. So another example of this is Coventry. You know, we're very proud to have helped a number of cities win City of Culture, Coventry being one of them. And part of that journey was about the people themselves coming together under their strategic story. So with Coventry, it was very important that they were a beacon for moving on and moving up. But also it was about recognizing, again, the things that made them special in terms of their innovation, technology and enterprise that I was talking about earlier. Also their peace and reconciliation. They're twinned with Dresden. But then also about repositioning the purpose of their city centre. And in this case, this was about recognizing it, that it wasn't a place really you went to shop, but it had the infrastructure and the facilities to make it event central, which also has a crossover with your place. So in terms of who's telling that story, you know, this isn't Jaguar Land Rover. These are the movers and shakers of the place in the city, getting together to be a powerful force, not only to lobby government for more money, but also to collaborate and swap and share skills. It's an incredibly powerful proposition of what happens when a place gets together. So again, hosted by the place, not by the council, governed by the people within the place who care about that place. So creating events. And they weren't shy in terms of going, you know what, we know where we can get a bit of money from. Let's take our unique story to London. Let's go and find those developers. Let's go and find those universities. Let's go and find those people who have the money to invest in our city. So this was an event that they held in the Shard. They took their unique story to the Shard and they invited people who could help their place move forward. Again, in terms of their events, this was about being ambitious. So looking at one of their other themes, which was about peace and reconciliation, this is ambitiously saying, well, we're going to combine this with our event central proposition, and we're going to create the biggest peace event in the world. We're going to get people like Desmond Tutu to host our event, and we're not going to do it in a small way. We're going to do it to scale. This simply happened by the people from the place going, how do we make the points and the things that make us special come to life and be an opportunity for the city? And this, in a way, this is kind of one of my favorite ones. This is, in a way, taking a negative and making it a positive. This was in one of the stakeholders meetings. This was in a Coventry champions meeting. And somebody in the meeting was grumbling about the ring road, saying, oh, it's a real negative, our ring road. What do we do with this? Somebody else went, I've got a mate who's really into classic cars. And why don't we do a place event that's about not only celebrating our innovation in terms of what we're doing, leading the world with self-drive cars and electronic cars, but let's basically use our ring road as a positive event for our place, both as a national way of drawing in talent and opportunity, but also for the people in the place themselves. So an incredible thing that just happened by the right people being in the room together and being ambitious. And of course, this leads to big things. This leads to, if you're being crude about it, millions of pounds being injected into a city because the people got together and rallied round for opportunity. So Coventry being 2021 UK City of Culture. So another example here, a different type of example, which is why I've shown it to you. We were very privileged to win Best International Place Brand in the world for this proposition. This is South Downs National Park. This takes on board a number of geographies, a number of different local authorities, but it has a very different story to tell and a very different visual language to do so. You know, this is about bringing to life the living landscape. This is about recognizing it's human by nature, which is very different from other national parks, and celebrating some of the other elements of it, of its story of Englishness. But I think the important thing here is conserving and creating and communicating a cultivated experience. So that cultivated experience meant that the visual language not just showed the elements of the language, but it showed how the cultivation of that landscape in terms of the geology would affect its landscape, in terms of its wildlife, in terms of its agriculture, which in turn would affect its people, its population, its poetry, all the layers. So once you have your visual language, there's a multitude of places you can use it, whether it be in newspapers and other forms of communication, whether it be environments, you know, like the South Downs Centre, whether it be in signage. So this is an example of some of its sculptural signage. But the important thing about this is not just what it is, but it's how it behaves. This is sustainable. This is wood from the national park. This is telling a story in its own right, which is a story of sustainability. It's also being ambitious in terms of its quality. It's sculptural. It's not just sticking a visual language on a flat surface. It's using some of those elements of the visual language, but reinterpreting them. This is also used, as you can see here, just carving into stuff in terms of its multitude of layers of how you use it. So it can be used very, very, very simply. And again, a multitude of products, whether it be their signage, whether it be local artisans creating beers and saying, well, actually being situated in the national park is something that makes our product unique. So we're going to have our own brand, but we're going to put where we are as part of our brand story. To vehicles and cars. So you're talking about your electric story, which is very important in terms of the environment, but very quietly, you've got this visual language that's sitting in the background. As you can see, the National Park Authority has its own identity and logo, which is different from the place's visual language. And that's very important. But again, you know, it can be used in things more hard edge with the rangers, like uniforms. And equally importantly here, this is an advertising campaign which was about making people, and this was coming out of the theme human by nature, behave like a national park. So this was saying, don't get in your cars, use public transport, use effectively, you become environmental yourselves, think differently, get a fresh perspective. And they had all these ingredients, so they could do this for free. They had the place photography, which you have, and they had a visual language, and they wanted to encourage local people to think and act differently. So effectively something that would cost thousands of pounds was virtually free, because it was just about working with local suppliers and volunteers in terms of where this message could get across. So behavior-wise, it's important to remember that that's the thing that should drive everything. One of the things that was very important to them was uniting 200 square miles of diverse geography. So when it came to them creating their website, we did a workshop with them. And what's interesting is how quickly people can forget why they have a strategy and why they should use it. They get excited about other stuff, particularly when it comes to technology. So when we did the workshop with them, they were going, well, what should we do in our first page? We can have the weather on there. We can have a widget that tells us what to do in the weather. Should we have our events on there? Why don't we have our most important asset on there? And it was reminding them that actually, in terms of their story, one of the most important things was uniting the different landscapes, uniting the different experiences that were all under one umbrella. So very simply, it was about their behavior going, if your strategy says this is what's different, this is how you should behave. And there was that moment, oh, of course. So of course that means when we first go on the website, the most important thing is we're uniting the geography and showing whether you're at the sea or whether you're on the heathland, it's part of the same story. Again, the multitude of products goes on and on and on when it comes to the South Downs National Park. And importantly, it's how do you work with some of your partners? The National Trust, as we are all very aware, don't like to have partners. They are the ultimate brand police. They're like, we have our money, we have our brands, come to us. And in a way, you start to lose where they are in the world, and they become a place devoid of localism. But when you have a visual language and when you have an expression, as you can see here, collaboration can happen. So the National Trust has its brand, it hasn't been interfered with, but it has the visual language of the South Downs National Park as part of its proposition. But not only that, when it came to them interpreting the inside of their experience, they used all the assets that they were given in a very creative way to say, we're actually proud to make a place that has a unique sense of localness and a unique sense of place. And we're part of that as a national brand. But also in terms of what happens to a visual language. If a visual language is used properly, it changes and adapts as the opportunities change or the businesses change for the place. So in this case, the South Downs National Park won dark sky status. So they took their structure, which was harnessed by their rolling hills, and told a unique story of their dark skies. They combined the elements of place with this unique story. So ambition is something that can happen, not necessarily always about cities and big scale. It can happen in a very small scale. We've shown this example because it's a really small scale example, but the people who got together from the place had big ambitions. So this is North Notts. And again, their breathing space was something that was really important to them. So that meant in terms of their proposition, when they created communication, it had a lot of space. It had breathing space. It celebrated its countryside offer unashamedly, its fields, its network. And it did things like created unique bunting to bring its market towns to life. It bought space in its local airport to celebrate itself and flex its muscles. Not only that, but it thought, how do we bring that breathing space into our market towns? So this was creating allotments that were within the town centre. So effectively bringing the countryside offer into the town centre and celebrating its local stories, whether they be the Dukeries, Creswell Craigs or Sherwood Forest. But also then on the ground, they were, well, how do we bring our uniqueness to life? How do we bring our stories to life, keeping them modern, but celebrating what's different about us? So here you can see their finger posts, their functional directional signage within their towns. So this was about taking their Robin Hood story and bringing it into the town centre. So again, moving that forward, but doing that in a modern way. Also, what was important was colour here. So each of the different towns has its own unique story, but they're also benefiting from the big stories. So this Robin Hood story went into the different towns. So you can see at the top, you've got Retford. Retford has its own unique colour, whether that's used in its local signs, whether that's used in its train station, whether that's used in smaller scale things. Whereas Worksop has its own unique colour too, as part of their palette. That still celebrates their big stories, that still uses those assets, but also is proud of where it is, and it's proud of the fact that it's different from Retford. So that can mean something as boring as a pay and display car park feels unique to place. It doesn't have to change how it's made. It doesn't have to be more expensive, but it has to be unique to place. And the visual language can help with that. But also there's other ways of telling those stories and talking about those assets. So this was in their train station. So this was the local historic community did this. And the wonderful thing about this is they wouldn't have had the money to do this. They wouldn't have had a visual language. They wouldn't have had photographs. They wouldn't have had stuff. But they were given stuff as part of their proposition. And they decided they wanted to cheer up their train station. It was Virgin Rail who paid for all this. So this cost nothing. This didn't cost the place anything apart from having ambition and a heart. And by doing that, the Historic Society turned what was quite a grubby and ugly train station into a wonderful story, into a wonderful place that was full of unique stories. Also, the council decided to remind themselves strategically of what makes them special. So they had individual meeting rooms that were based around the strategic themes of the wider place. And that would remind them, how do we do things differently? How do we create things that bring to life, moving forward, our uniqueness of place? So this becomes incredibly exciting the more ambitious you are. So this is a museum dedicated to another one of their stories, the Pilgrim story. And this was born out of them saying, well, how do we bring our stories to life? How do we push our uniqueness? So, you know, a museum was born from a strategic story amongst many other things. So rather than have big signage to say welcome to North Notts, their ambitions are enormous. They want to have a sculpture which is bigger than any other sculpture in Britain that celebrates ruralism, celebrates the countryside. So it becomes a beacon in their mind, which brings attention to them, which is greater than the Angel of the North did for the North. But on a very practical level, they all got together, they lobbied the government, and they were the first rural place to win a bid. And that means, in simple terms, millions of pounds of investment for the place. And that is utterly fantastic. That's how powerful your strategic story can be, and in the multiple ways of how it can help change behavior, bring people together, and make things happen that didn't happen before. So I'm going to kind of stop, well, pretty soon, we'll give you all a rest and start thinking about how we can use the strategic story to bring you to life. The Harrogate toolkit, really, this is about a document, a technical document that brings together how you can do things, you know, very often used by graphic designers or brand managers in terms of the place. In terms of its content, it will introduce the themes, the big idea, the strategic direction. It will show you how to use your visual language, your white language, your visual identity, practical things, color palette, typography, photography, if you're commissioning photography, where you should think about using it, what you should think about should be in it, who should be in it, why should things be in it, how should it look, and additional tools, you know, showing you different applied examples of how you can use all these different elements together. You know, so as I say, talking about your story, simplifying that story, making that accessible. Really, this is for stakeholders to use. And there's as I said before, in many different ways. It might be about you're using it simply to, how do I get young people to come to my business when they graduate? How do I use it? How do I use the elements and the photographs that come from the story to show them, look, there's lots of artisans and brands. There's lots of proposition to have here. To how do I use this visual language? You know, can I use it on the wall in my factory? Can I use it in my university foyer entrance? Or will it be a button on my website that says, well, here's my business story, but then here's the wider place story. Showing you the white visual language, talking about the color palette for the wider place, and you choosing within that what your unique village or town color palette is within that. The guidance for the photography, as I talked about before, and some of the people in terms of photographing your talent, and showing some of the identities, you know, ripping, you know, your other places, your other towns and stories, that their unique voice is as important as your hero in Harrogate, but also uniting those assets where they need to be united in terms of place layering. So there is, you know, there's a number of products that have happened since the beginning of this process. The Harrogate Story is another one of those. You may already have a copy of this. And this again is simply showing your strategic story. This is simply gathering together that research really under one place and saying, you know, from a stakeholder's point of view, to remind you as individual stakeholders, these are the bits that make us special. So when we're communicating our business story, we can flex the muscle of our place story. So whether they be about showing off about other businesses and the quality of other businesses, which in effect, you know, it's much better to say, oh, that person's really talented, oh, and they happen to be connected to me, than it is to say, oh, I'm really talented, because you sound like an ass when you do that. So flexing your muscles about your neighbors and the fact that you're all part of a wider proposition. Showing off about your assets, showing off about Betty's, which is just got to be the best cafe in the world. But your other things, you know, your brewery pubs, your other unique stories, but there's a multitude of them. Your landscapes, and your countryside, you know, which is part of that quality of life and that living proposition that you've got, which is incredibly high quality. And, you know, the tens of thousands of businesses that are hidden in there. You know, there's a multitude of things to shout about. The storybook is just reminding you of just some of those elements and some of those things, and telling that effectively story for the stakeholders as nothing else, as a strategic reminder of what's special. So again, whether it be events that happen on a larger scale or whether they be community events, it's showing these things and celebrating them. So these are just some of the pages from your storybook. And these are some of the other things that have happened in terms that are moving on by some of the different stakeholders, you know, and these are things that are happening that you guys are doing, which is incredibly exciting. Bringing in parts of the language, using elements, moving it forward, being playful with where you communicate what's going on in the place. And some of the quick wins here, you know, a banner to some degree is a very small thing, but it can tidy a place and make it feel like there's a modern interest in that place and it's cared for. But, you know, celebrating some of those things like your gaming festival and you meet and bringing that in, connecting it to place. So these are just some of the things, and hopefully, you know, you guys in the virtual room now in this Zoom meeting are going to be thinking, well, how do I use it? How do I make it work for my brand? And we go back to the story, and really, how do we do that? How can we take these individual elements and bring them to life? Going back to taking these elements, the Harrogate story, the mobilizing brand Harrogate as your big idea, you know, and you can't underestimate that notion that connecting the word Harrogate and the brand of Harrogate with its quality to your business is a positive story. I mean, it's an incredible place that already has a national brand and a recognition of quality that goes with that. You know, how do you connect with that? How do you effectively use that wider story? In terms of our places, your stage, you know, you might find that you only concentrate on one theme. Only one theme might be relevant to you as an organization, or you might find all the themes are. The point is that the research said that these are your points of difference. So if you're thinking, well, as a backdrop with our event centers, and also not just our event centers, what people can do in terms of staying longer when they come to some of these events in terms of the stage, but also the stage as inviting new businesses and inviting young people to stay in terms of that independent commercial spirit. You know, they can utilize this oasis. People, the trends that were happening before COVID, where most people were moving to large cities, large international cities. That's changed, that's reversing now. And for the foreseeable future, there's an incredible opportunity in terms of the place's business story and its lifestyle offer beating a city in terms of its business story and its offer, because things have changed. Your artisans and brands will push forward in this new circumstance, but that rural connection is a much stronger proposition in terms of livability and work and livability crossing over. So when you think of that place story, it's sort of saying, how can I use this story to change the environment? Whether that be my business environment, whether that be the wider environment of the place, whether that be an individual event or individual product. How do I use it for our communications, whether it be photography, visual language, whether it be the way we talk about the place, whether it be about the tone of language, in terms of how we talk about the place, whether that be about your behavior. You know, one of the things that excites me is some of the behavior changes. So I guess it's, where does this happen? You know, where one of my favorite simple things in Northern Ireland was taxi drivers were trained to become storytellers. So they became the sales force for the country. How can you bend your businesses with your strategic story?
Okay, Peter, thank you for that. A huge amount of content in there, lots for us to think about. So guys, this is the chance for you to ask questions using the Q&A facility on the bottom of your screen. You can ask Peter, Mark, myself. I've already got some questions rolling in, which is good. So, Peter, one of these, how do you know which element of the visual language to use on a specific occasion?
Well, I mean, the way to think about the visual language is the visual language is not about using the individual elements. It's about the sum of all parts. It's your story, whether that, which would probably be used with photography, will be your unique story or your unique business proposition in terms of businesses. What you're actually saying is our point of focus is supported by all these other elements of innovation. So therefore, by association, the point of the visual language is showing off, whether it be something as simple as a curl in your beautiful Victorian railing, or whether it be your cafe culture independent spirit, or whether it be the beautiful buildings, river, and some of the unique offers in terms of research and development and SMEs and I guess pulling those all together in one visual language is actually saying it's putting the wider place in focus. So the quick answer is I wouldn't focus in one of the elements. I will make the point that you communicate your story uniquely in terms of your needs, and this becomes effectively another illustrative element that helps you talk about that sum of all parts.
Great. Another one. In terms of the visual assets, you showed a version of the white visual language placed over Pantones and images. Is that available in JPEG design files, etc.?
Well, for you to use it, you'd probably want it as a ping, not a JPEG, because a ping can be overlaid over photographs and things. But absolutely, yes, it's there as part of the toolkit. In many cases, it's a soft way and therefore a useful way for businesses to use the visual language, because it helps push it into the background, which is often important.
Okay.
Just to jump in there as well, just very practically, I've put a link in the chat where people can sort of download all of those resources. So we've got the graphics, as Peter just said, loads of photos, and those photos are being added to all of the time. The storybook that I happen to have one, just by me, all free to use, all available. And it's for those that can't see the chat, it's Think Harrogate, all one word, .co.uk/resources.
Great. Thanks, Mark. We've got a question here about the process we went through in terms of research and engagement that led to the themes and the creative output. So I think the important bit with that is that was a very robust process where we did a stakeholder mapping exercise at the beginning of the piece of work, so we could reflect the different aspects of the place. So that's different sectors, different geographies, so that we were able to engage with a lot of people, everything from young people, as I said, to people in the different centres, to people outside of the area as well. So a huge amount of that, a lot of desk research, looking at existing things. So I think the important bit with this is not to reinvent the wheel. A lot of work had already been done. So this was about building on that existing work. And then there's kind of a process of filtering that evidence to get to the themes. And the themes aren't the only elements you can talk about. I think the important bit with the themes are, we're suggesting they're what you should focus on, because they're important for your place economy moving forward. They are the bits which differentiate you the most and allow you to get the message across on areas that are important to you. For example, things around knowledge economy, businesses, life sciences, etc. Harrogate is just not known as being an opportunity for that, but critically important if you can attract investment in those areas. So that's where the themes came from. But a little bit like the Peter's talked about with the visuals, this isn't about stopping innovation. It's not about stopping creativity. It's just about giving it a focus. So you can still talk about other aspects of the place, even if you don't see them directly as a header of a theme. Next one. Peter, what's the best example of a place using visual language that you can think of, and what have they done specifically that makes you say that?
How long have you got? I mean, some of the examples that, you know, there's a multitude of examples in terms of I could talk about, and obviously I talked about some of those examples. I don't think I'd pick out any one thing for any one reason. I mean, for me, I get really excited. One of the first places we worked with was a small town called Burnley. And I think just by the stakeholders getting together at quite an early stage, they levied several £million from the government to help do practical things to their town. And that simple use of getting together through a process and actually sticking together. So, I mean, I think where brands don't work is when a bunch of consultants rock in, tell people what they think, rock out, and you get this thing called a logo, which often is the first letter of the city. And you get a thing where it kind of all looks the same. You get a B for Birmingham, a B for Belfast, a B for Blackpool, and it all becomes a bit, what was that for? Actually, there's a thing called the golden thread that we often talk about, which is when the process is successful, it's when the people of the place unite behind caring about the place. And we call that the golden thread, that connection between the people and through the process in terms of discovering a unique strategic story. And then what they do together, that is the thing that I get really excited about. And I've got to say, from what I've seen so far, Harrogate is doing that. And I'm incredibly excited about what Harrogate is going to do moving forward, because I think that it's full of ambitious people who recognize that by getting together and being champions of Harrogate, there is a massive benefit to us as individual organizations.
One for you, Mark. By the very nature, unfortunately, you get some of the trickier ones, but there we go. So there are a lot of different groups representing the district. The Bid, Visit Harrogate, Think Harrogate, and there's a lot of politics with each, surely not. How do you get all of these to work together so we've got one place, one message?
Oh, what a great question, and obviously not a simple answer on this. I guess just a couple of things to point out. So what we're trying to do here, Think Harrogate with the sort of the leadership group, and also the Place Network group, which is a sort of a bigger community of champions, ambassadors who want to promote the area. We have no funding at all. It's not an organisation. It's not got a budget, and that makes us very different from some of the other groups within Harrogate. I think all we're trying to do is to provide tools to help other organisations, other groups, other businesses tell their stories, but hopefully in this consistent way that means that there's a halo effect on all of them, and it just becomes better for all of the businesses, all of the organisations in the place. So I think, you know, all we're trying to do is create an open invite and a dialogue, try to provide a toolkit and welcome everyone with their opinions into the conversation. But I very much take your point, Anne, that there are lots of different groups and there are lots of different politics within them.
Okay. I've got a question here which probably we aren't in a position to answer, which is to do with support for a business to do with lockdown. So I didn't want you to think I was ignoring that. Whoever asked it, I will pass that on to the local authority.
Just comment on that. I mean, so I've sort of just seen the question, and you know, it is difficult when we're talking about sort of place stories and marketing to sort of think about that. But having been you know, an entrepreneur at the very, very start of a journey as well. I know how hard it is normal times, let alone this year where it's just gone unbelievably difficult for most. I would just want to point out there are some sort of good free support services available. So certainly, I think there's like SME growth managers through Harrogate Borough Council, or the LEPs from either North Yorkshire or Leeds City region would offer workshops, advice. So I think, you know, maybe just checking out the websites of business support from either Harrogate Borough Council or North Yorkshire LEP or Leeds City region LEP might be a place to look, if that's helpful.
Okay, no, brilliant. Peter, do you see the brand changing on a regular basis?
I think, you know, like I give the example with Southlands National Park, I think that when it's relevant, it will evolve. I think most of the ingredients that are there are going to be there for a long time. I think where it gets exciting is the fact that, you know, like any brand, once you get into years of recognition, then it takes on a strength. You know, that it takes a long time to recognize a brand and a brand to become alive, really. And so I think that I can, of course, see as new parts of the story develop, elements being added to in this case, the visual language. But I think that the individual communications and needs can be met right now in terms of if there's a new story, that new story can be told. But effectively, the brand is I guess allowing any individual story to have the wider place layering story to support its story.
Great. I'm very conscious of everyone's time. We're bang on time. There's been a huge amount of content and some really great questions, which I thank you for. So at this point, I'll hand over to Mark to close the session.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Peter. And if there are any questions that we haven't answered, could we have the opportunity to either, you know, sort of take those offline or get back to people? I think that would be really helpful. I guess I just want to say, you know, another thank you for coming along and talking about, you know, the amazing opportunities that I think we have as a Harrogate district, and also Peter for some, you know, very inspirational examples of how other places have used this, you know, from Chesterfield's Twisted Spire to Coventry to South Downs National Park. You know, all those places are very different, but they've sort of used, you know, similar inspirations to sort of achieve some really, really great things. And you know, it's not just, you know, the places as well, it's how local businesses have got involved and sort of used this in very specific ways that's all contributed. I've mentioned the toolkit. It's available on thinkharrogate.co.uk. Certainly worth having a look at and looking at some of the blogs and other posts that we've got there. And I think, you know, at the end of Peter's presentation, he showed a few examples of businesses locally starting to use this. I hope people have started to see some of this visual identity being used, you know, some of the COVID signage around the towns and the examples from festivals that Peter gave. But, you know, this is only going to happen if everyone starts to, you know, embrace it and use it in its own specific way. So that's, you know, one of the things that we're hopefully going to encourage. I did talk about a place network group, a group of people who want to, you know, help Harrogate, help promote Harrogate. We're going to have our next Place Network group in October. I think the date's TBC, but we're going to focus it on one of the themes called Beacon of Independent Commercial Spirit. And what I'll try to make sure is that the participants on this call at least get the details, if that's okay, for the next network event. It'd be brilliant to just see as many of you there as possible. So conscious we're 2 minutes over, sorry about that, but I thought it was a really, really great session, hopefully useful for everyone. So thank you very much, and have a great Friday. Thank you. Bye-bye.